next speaker on the panel is Dr. Manish Gupta. Dr. Gupta is Director of Google Research India and Infosys Foundation Chair Professor at IIIT Bangalore. May I invite Dr. Manish Gupta for his talk? He would be speaking on the topic AI for India and beyond. Dr. Gupta, over to you.
Thanks. So I'll talk about, again, the work that we are doing at our research lab, applying AI for problems inspired by the Indian context and then going beyond. So, so we've already seen, again, AI beginning to have very tangible impact on many industries, pretty much every industry around us. Google established its youngest research lab in Bangalore in September last year. Again, the obvious question to us was what should be the charter, and we really decided to focus on, of course, we're doing a lot of fundamental research consistent with overall Google research philosophy. But as we look at which kind of problems do we pick where we apply some of our AI research, we are really picking many of these based on the impact that we can see on India and then going beyond India, both through existing products of Google as well as helping create new products and addressing problems that need not be tied to any either existing or even future Google products. So I'll talk about mostly work in progress that we have initiated across these different buckets. So I'll talk about what we are doing in the area of healthcare and the AI for Social Good program that we have, where we are addressing public health, education, and wildlife conservation related problems. Then I'll talk about what we are doing to help improve Google products, and a lot of it is again driven by the whole diversity of languages that we have, as well as novel problems that arise or important problems that arise in the Indian context. And finally, talk about some of the more foundational research where we are looking at addressing some of the outstanding challenges when it comes to technologies like deep learning. So let me start with, again, one of my favorite topics, which is transforming healthcare, which I really believe is, one of the most important areas in which we are going to see AI being applied. And one of the reasons is that, of course, health is extremely important to all of us. And if you look at the world around us, there's not a single country, and this is not even talking about the COVID situation and so on, there's not a single country which is happy with its healthcare system. So what I'm showing on this chart is the per capita health expenditure in different countries, what you end up spending on healthcare, and United States leads that chart, where this is data for 2018, and again these numbers continue to go up. Already in 2018, you were spending more than 10,000 US dollars each year on the healthcare of a person, and this isn't money you spend when the person gets sick. This is on an average what you're spending, and obviously that is unsustainable. So US has been looking into, again, ways in which it transforms its healthcare system. Now you look at a country like UK, which has a much lower average healthcare cost per person, and one could even argue better outcomes than the US if you think in terms of life expectancy and so on. And you might think that it's only the US which is an outlier. Countries like UK and so on are doing well with their healthcare system. But if you look at the underlying trends of the rising costs, all of these countries, including UK, they are very worried about those rising costs, and they're trying to figure out how to reduce those costs. And when it comes to healthcare, nobody wants to make compromises on quality. So you want to reduce these costs while improving quality. Now, again, one extreme on this chart is our nation, India, where the per capita expenditure is much lower And somebody who's not familiar with India might think that India is doing a great job of containing healthcare costs, whereas we know that the reason this cost per capita is so low is that we just don't provide decent healthcare to much of our population. And if we were to look at, again, those of us who are lucky enough to have decent healthcare, our kind of cost curves look very much like some of these countries like US and so on. So as we start building up the healthcare system for much of our country, especially rural areas where we don't have really a formal functioning, really modern healthcare system, we can't afford to take the path that countries like the US have taken. So if you listen to healthcare experts, what do they tell you? What's a way to improve healthcare, again, while reducing costs? This is kind of my rendition as a whatever was initially like a compiler researcher when I looked at different tiers. So as a compiler researcher, I used to worry a lot about how do we optimize programs and in particular data accesses for memory hierarchy. So on any computer system, you have things like your registers. So ideally, you want as much of data access to happen out of registers as possible. If not registers, you want it to come out of your level 1 cache, otherwise level 2 cache, otherwise main memory. And God forbid, you need to access the hard disk to access the data because hard disk accesses are very expensive. So I found very similar kind of analogous things happening in healthcare, that the healthcare system itself is built in all these different tiers, and the analog to hard disk access for data would be the ICU in a typical hospital, where as a doctor famously remarked, he once asked a question: where do you find the most expensive place to stay overnight? And often your first thought is a fancy resort in a exotic location. And he said it's the ICU of a typical hospital where you have to shell out over $10,000 to spend that night. And it's not a particularly fun place. So the point is that if you could take care of people before they have to enter the ICU, while they are in the regular ward of the hospital, or better still, if you could take care of them at the primary healthcare level, that would be even better. And applying that same reasoning all the way, if you could take care of people before they need to go to the hospital, right? So again, my prediction is the real action in healthcare in the future is going to be outside hospitals. Just like we in education, we talked about flipped classrooms. Even healthcare providers are thinking a lot about flipped healthcare. How do they provide healthcare to people before they enter the hospital? So when we are living our normal lives at home and at work, if we can focus more on prevention and timely intervention, timely detection of your risk factors and intervention before the disease becomes serious. Again, I mean, there's the saying, prevention is better than cure. That can really lead to much better outcome and also help reduce costs. So let's look at one concrete example of how we are taking this proactive approach and how AI might help. So I'll start with this example of screening for diabetic retinopathy. And diabetic retinopathy is one of the fast growing causes of blindness. Across the world, there are over 400 million people with the diabetes condition, and they're all potentially susceptible to diabetic retinopathy, which can lead to blindness. Regular screening, as is the kind of a common theme across many diseases that we encounter, regular screening is really the key to improving outcomes. So you can prevent that blindness by identifying the problem early enough. And essentially what the doctors do is they kind of look at these retinal fundus images and they look for signs of hemorrhages. Now, what happens is in a country like India, we have a severe shortage of eye doctors. I mean, you look at actually any specialty. I mean, you look at general physician practice, we have a shortage of doctors. You pick any specialty, and you'll find there is a severe shortage of doctors with that specialty in India. So the same is true for ophthalmology. Because of our shortage, what happens is 45% of the patients end up suffering a vision loss before they're ever diagnosed. And the way to the gold standard for diagnosis is that you take this retinal fundus image through a special camera, and then the ophthalmologist, they look for signs of hemorrhage, and they grade your condition on a 5-point scale, 1 being no diabetic retinopathy and 5 being a very high level proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So what we did was we again applied the uh, uh, Inception 4 architecture. So we all know deep learning made a comeback when uh, it got applied to this image classification task, where you could automatically analyze these images and be able to identify is this the image of a cat or a dog, is there a human there, and so on. So what we did was we essentially uh, uh, extended that work along with all of this label data to be able to rate these images on this 5-point scale, and it led to, again, what I'm showing here is the final result. There was a lot of, I mean, the initial results uh, uh, were not very good, and the team had to work on a number of improvements, including improving the resolution of these images. Going for, in many cases, there were ophthalmologists who themselves did not agree on what the rating should be of a given image. So using an adjudication process to get to better ground truth on what the data is, and things like hyperparameter tuning and so on. So after all of those improvements, the team was able to publish results where they showed results from this automated detection of diabetic retinopathy. This algorithm, they showed results on par with a general ophthalmologist. And they published that work in the Journal of American Medical Association. In fact, this journal, JAMA, they recently, earlier this year, they looked at what were the 10, they did a rating of the 10 best papers in the last decade, and this paper was one of them. It was, again, the lead author here was Varun Gulshan, who's shown in this picture. He was actually, he's our first researcher who, in fact, moved to India before the research lab existed. So he, by de facto, was the very first researcher for Google Research in India, who in fact started this work. And then the team went on to do further work where they were able to show results that were on par with even retinal specialists. So while these results are very, very impressive, I also want to strike a note of caution, because often we get very caught up in the hype around deep learning, AI, and so on, and we think the problem has all been solved. There are still outstanding challenges. One example of a challenge is that, yes, on an average, you're doing much better than a retinal specialist, but deep learning algorithms often have this drawback that when you make mistakes, you make mistakes in a very confident manner. So unlike humans, typically what would happen is if a human doctor sees a complicated case, they would actually realize that this is complicated, and often they would say, hey, I'm not so sure about this case, let me consult another colleague for a second opinion. Whereas the deep learning algorithm might very confidently say, yes, I'm very confident about this case, and come in with a wrong prediction. So that is a real challenge as you look into deploying AI in these very, very kind of critical areas like health, where you're making a difference to people's lives. There are other challenges like explainability. Yes, I mean, the model has said that yes, there is diabetic retinopathy, but I mean, how did it come up with that diagnosis? And that is especially important, right, as you try to handle those corner cases. Often we still find, again, there's a lot more work that needs to be done to make these algorithms more explainable. And then, of course, there are concerns like fairness. Often you find, yes, I mean, these models doing well on uh, the kind of population where you have kind of gotten a lot of data. So it might work well on whatever, let's say, the Indian population here in this case, because yes, we have labeled a lot of data from Indian patients, or it might work well for, let's say, Caucasian, white Caucasian people, but not work very well for African Americans. So there are all these fairness issues that often still dog many AI solutions. So I just wanted to kind of strike that note of caution, even while we obtain all these results. And continuing with this theme of home monitoring, our another effort that we have is to really start utilizing the mobile phone that we all carry as a kind of a ubiquitous source of sensors through which we can really sense what's going on as we live our normal lives. So things like mobiles, wearables, and cameras through which uh, our body vitals, our various activities, and our state of mind and our environment can be monitored. We are looking into how can we use that sensing, and often you need to apply AI to even come up with these signals about these body vitals and activities and so on. And then how do you analyze this data, these signals, to come up with risk models, and then suggest timely interventions, and try to convince the human to go for that intervention. So a concrete use case that we have started working on is on preventing cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 killer both in India and worldwide. And and it turns out that 80% of people in India, when they die of heart attacks and strokes, they're actually unaware that they were at a risk of cardiovascular disease. And the other interesting fact is that there are very simple lifestyle interventions through which potentially the person who's dying of a heart attack, and increasingly you're hearing about instances of people dying of a heart attack at very young age, in the 40s. And recently there was even a case of an actor in Karnataka dying of heart attack at the age of 39. So often people, I mean, there's that potential to add at least 10 to 15 years of healthy life to people. And of course, there are data privacy concerns as you begin to kind of analyze and collect this very sensitive data. So the framework that we are really building up on is the federated learning framework that's been developed at Google Research. And now a lot of organizations, a lot of academic organizations as well as companies are using this framework because it lets you handle data privacy in a suitable manner. So the idea here is not to have to bring all of that health data to a central server for analysis, but on the other hand, let the data stay confined to the mobile device. So if, let's say, my health data never leaves my mobile device, then I'm going to be much more comfortable with whatever that data being analyzed. And the obvious drawback, if you were to just use naive kind of machine learning only on the device, is that your machine learning model only learns from the data that you see on a given device. Now, federated learning comes up with a way in which you still are able to learn an overall machine learning model from all of this data, from the millions of devices which are contributing data, without having to see the raw data on any of these devices. How do you learn that model in a federated manner? and allow that to be distributed to all of these devices. And combined with techniques like differential privacy, again, it lets you take care of, again, build these models in a manner that you can never recover the original raw data of the individual. And again, this has a lot of implications for how you could try to build this kind of a health companion that I'm talking about in a manner that still preserves the privacy of the individual. I know we are kind of, I guess I have about maybe 6 minutes left. Let me very quickly give you a flavor of some of the other problems that we are looking at. So in our AI for Social Good program, we are working with NGOs as well as academic partners to pick problems that are meaningful and then looking at applying AI to help deal with those problems and then deploy them with the help of these NGOs. And just one example that I'll cover is from our partnership with this NGO called Arman, which has this M-Mitra program to improve maternal and child health. And it turns out that, again, in India, there are several mothers who die during pregnancy or suffer other complications during pregnancy. It's just an unacceptably high number. And so Arman has this program where they deliver, using a mobile voice calling service, they deliver these targeted messages for every week of the pregnancy, and then during the first 6 months of the child's birth, you send these helpful messages about what to expect, what to watch out for, tips about what kind of nutrition, what kind of diet you should be taking, what kind of maybe vaccination the child needs, and so on. And it has been shown in various studies by Arman to lead to much better outcomes. The trouble is, roughly half of the expecting mothers actually drop out of the program for various reasons. So they approached us to see, could you apply AI to predict these drop-offs so that they could then intervene suitably and keep these expecting mothers engaged in the program. And in this joint work that we did with IIT Madras, with Professor Ravindran and his students, the model that they built was able to identify these women who are going to identify roughly 80% of the women who were going to drop out. Switching, okay, I know I'm out of time. I'll just very briefly mention things like we have a project on forecasting of floods that has actually been deployed in many regions covering the Ganga River in India. And the basic idea here is to, again, use physical measurements of water levels in the river at various points, and then use these hydrologic models. So hydrologic model is something that, again, based on things like water, precipitation, temperature, and so on, gives you the amount of water flow in the river. And the hydraulic model, which simulates the flow of river. And what we have done is, again, taken a machine learning approach to building these models. And there have been several challenges. For instance, you need very accurate elevation maps in order to be able to do a good job with these hydraulic models. And the challenge is that many of these elevation maps, let's say, that come from sources like NASA and so on, A, they are old, often 10 years old, and B, they are at a very coarse grain resolution, 90 meter by 90 meter, which is shown on the left, that if you were to use that resolution, your hydraulic model is not very accurate. I don't know if you're able to see this animation, whereas with a finer grain resolution, you're able to do a much better job. And again, long story short, with these models, we've been able to significantly improve both the precision and recall. And precision obviously helps with reducing false positives, and recall, which is identifying actual cases of flooding, which we have been able to improve significantly through this ML-based model. And this has actually been deployed in many regions, and we are extending that. And in fact, we have our Earth observation science team, which is again applying computer vision techniques to satellite images to further improve the riverbed extraction that gets used by the flood forecasting model, as well as we are working on problems like land cover classification, where our goal is to, with the Earth engine, for every point on the map, be able to do a classification of whether it's a water body, whether it's forest, grassland, and so on. And through this, you can actually do some very, very interesting analysis of what is happening to the planet over a period of time. How much of forest cover are you losing? How much of water, whatever bodies are getting lost or getting encroached upon because of, again, uh, human activity. Let me kind of skip some of this. We have been, maybe I'll use this as maybe the last example. So we have products like, of course, Google Search that gets used by many people, Google Voice Assistant that is being used by, again, tens of millions of users daily. It ships in 9 Indian languages. And again, the rich diversity of Indian languages and dialects and accents creates a lot of very interesting challenges for us. So how do you deal with those variations? How do you support code mixing? And how do you help create effective knowledge graphs when these sources of data are coming from not from English? And how do you engage these first-time internet users? Because many of these users of the assistant, it's the first time that they're using a mobile device and an internet and so on. So let me kind of stop here in the interest of time and just convey that this is a very exciting area to be a computer scientist as well as an AI researcher because again we see so many problems that we see around us. We look at them as opportunities to really for us to make a difference through the use of our technology. So I'm very envious of some of the younger people in the audience because I mean uh, we are entering this era where kind of I'm already like well over 50, and so I wish I was one of the students. For instance, the students who are attending these webinars, entering my career at this time, which is so exciting, where we are going to see more and more applications of technologies like AI for problems that we haven't even imagined yet. So looking forward to that very exciting future. So let me stop here and see if there is time for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. This was, in fact, a very fascinating presentation of the Google span in the field of AI, and it's pretty interesting to see what are the various facets that you've been working on, especially the one which is flood forecasting mechanism, because India is one of the vulnerable countries in the field of climate change. So this kind of an approach would certainly be very, very helpful for India. Now let's see if we have some questions. We have two basic questions. I think they are more conceptual. One is on two federated learning. One is how to cope up with false positive and false negative results from federated learning. And another question is, what is the core concept behind federated learning? Is it like hash data or embedding or something is shared from each device? I think a very conceptual.
Yeah. So on the first question, let me say the issue of false positive and false negative, right? It dogs any technique in machine learning. It's not limited to federated learning. So of course, with federated learning, what you try to achieve is ideally as much accuracy as you can using a centralized model, right? And that's not always possible because yes, you do give up to some degree on the accuracy. But if you were operating in a mode where people would not be comfortable sharing that data, then that centralized model anyways would not kind of be able to access all of that data. So you would end up losing out relative to federated learning, right? So that way it's not a apples to apples comparison. Back to the second question on kind of what's the core principle. The core idea here is to, as you learn, let's say as you do, let's say stochastic gradient descent on the local data, let's say that's the deep learning algorithm and you're running this stochastic gradient descent algorithm, which is learning all these weights. So instead of sharing the raw data back with the centralized server where the model is running, you actually just share these gradients, and you then are also and you receive all these gradients from all of these different devices, right, which are all running in some sense their own stochastic gradient descent, right, on the local data, and then you try to learn a global model, right? You let's say do the appropriate, let's say global reduction computation and so on to learn the global model, and then you distribute back that global model into these devices. And you initially bootstrap by learning, I mean, by operating on some proxy data and learning some approximate model, right, that you initially distribute on the device. So federated learning is already being used, for instance, today when you type on your keyboard, let's say mobile phone, right, when you're typing your message, there's a machine learning model which is predicting what word are you going to type next, or the what word are you going to type when you've just typed the first few characters. Again, this is being done on Google, at least platforms using federated learning framework, because again, you don't want to be able to have to access, right? I would not be comfortable sharing what I'm typing, right, with Google, and yet I want to get the benefit of the machine learning applied to that data.
Right. But the added question to this is that is federated machine learning quite trusted AI mechanism? Like, do we consider it as a trusted or responsible AI?
Yeah, this is obviously a step towards supporting. So we have these 7 principles for AI that we have adopted at Google, and we now make sure every research project, every product goes through an audit to see are we complying with those principles. And one of those principles is around data privacy. So federated learning is again a way to help us uh, uh, honor kind of the privacy expectations that people may have about their data. There are other principles like ensuring there is fairness and so on, right, which are also important issues for the AI systems.
Right. So I think with this we come to an end with this very, very useful session. And Dr. Gupta, your very, very insightful presentation was quite knowledgeable, especially for us, because we are in this domain of policy, and we do explore these challenges in various areas, especially climate change, especially healthcare. So Google plays a very important role. Thank you so much, sir.